Next question. Hey, David, what's the difference at this point between the alt-right and just conservative Republicans? This is an important thing to understand. You know, back in 2010, when we had the rise of the Tea Party, it was important to understand what the differences were between the Tea Party movement and broader conservative Republicanism as it existed in the style of, George W. Bush or whatever. Right now, it's important, particularly because Donald Trump receives a disproportionate amount of support from the alt-right, to understand the difference between the alt-right and broader conservative Republicans. The alt-right is more concerned about cultural issues other than abortion, right? So traditional conservative Republicans still have abortion as basically the cultural social issue. The alt-right has become very concerned with things about nationalism, non-whites who won't integrate in the United States, immigration in a much more xenophobically tinged way, non-white cultural race realism we're seeing. That is a notable difference between the alt-right and traditional conservative Republicans. And this actually links back to Richard Spencer in many ways. I don't want to make him more prominent than he deserves, but Richard Spencer, who I don't remember if he coined the term alt-right or started growing the movement under that name. He's one of the early people, and he on my show said he is a white nationalist, a white separatist. He said it on my program. And you have to understand that to understand one of the main splits between the alt-right and broader conservatism. Traditional conservatism, and this is a really interesting thing, traditional conservatism is more individualistic in economic areas, deregulate, let people do what they want. Let businesses do what they want. Don't support people with welfare. Let them, as they say, pull themselves up from their bootstraps. Determine their own fate and future. Free markets, that type of thing. And interestingly, the alt-right has a more collectivist component, but only in certain areas, specifically along lines of we have to defend white workers. We need to defend native-born Americans. So while the traditional conservative, even if some of their policies are implicitly discriminatory on racial lines, their focus is on individualism, even if some people who are in the so-called, they have agent identities, they are in the overclass, don't do as well. But the alt-right is more open to the idea of the government getting involved in collectivist policy, assuming that it is, again, the defense of white workers against brown people from other countries, a defense of native-born Americans, people from good countries instead of S-hole countries, that type of thing. So that gets us to the race element. The alt-right is more explicitly racist, while many conservative ideas are racist in their effect by preserving the status quo and not dealing with issues in society. And I want to be clear, I'm not defending conservatism. I'm pointing out what the differences are. The alt-right is less concerned with being pro-business, for example, as is traditional conservatism. Traditional conservatism is more about perpetuating the status quo, an aristocratic overclass, while the alt-right is less overtly concerned with that. They want to perpetuate a sort of nationalist, native-born overclass, even if it is not economically an overclass in all cases. There's actually quite a difference between reactionism and conservatism, even though they're often conflated because there is a lot of overlap in the United States. In practice in the US, much of the conservatism that is in the mainstream is reactionary. But in strict terms, these are actually two different things. The non-reactionary conservatism exists, in some academic circles to some degree, but not all. There are wings of right libertarianism that are less reactionary than the alt-right. What makes this more complicated is that there are not clear lines, and lots of these movements aren't super well defined. They're often leaderless. Who they support will often shift. But in some general sense, the alt-right is much more ethno-nationalist and authoritarian, while the traditional conservatives do have some authoritarian tendencies when it comes to, for example, religion and implementing and enforcing religion. But they are generally less authoritarian and thus more likely to be disgusted with Trump's authoritarianism than is the alt-right. Now, a lot of overlap. Even people who don't consider themselves to be in the alt-right, but say that they are conservatives, can have authoritarian tendencies or like Trump, and that's an important thing to understand. We saw this manifest a little bit. I don't even want to talk about this, but in the recent Groyper versus Turning Point USA Don Jr. thing, I won't get into it now, but look that up. We have a segment on it, and you can find out a lot more about it.